get the best helmet you can afford. I only wear a full face helmet.
Here we go with another episode of Ask the Lawyer. Today our questions are all about motorcycle safety. Are you safe enough? I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com. My guest is attorney Claude Wyle, the law firm of Choulos Choulos Wyle in San Francisco. Claude, thank you for making some time to answer our questions today.
Thank you, Rob.
Now, let's start off. You're a little background. You're a motorcycle rider yourself, correct?
Absolutely. I'm a lifelong rider. I think I started when I was about 12 years old. I've had a motorcycle continuously since I got my license. And at the present time, I've only got one. My partner's got 5 because he fell in love with vintage bikes and he can't say no. But right now, I've just got one Ducati.
So let's talk about safety. I guess we start with motorcycle safety gear. What is your advice? When should people use safety gear? Only on longer rides, every time? What's your advice for riders?
Well, I live right next to Highway 1, which is that curvy road on the California coast. And honestly, I put on all the safety gear every single time I ride. I don't think there's really room in life to not be as safe as possible when you're riding a motorcycle. I know not everybody agrees, but I think it's very important. Maybe you don't need the leather pants for a putt down to the coffee shop, but if something happens, you'd be happy to have leather pants or something with padding in them. I think it would be my advice to wear good protective gear no matter when you go out, each and every time.
Let's talk about what that good protective gear is. You mentioned leather pants. What do you think are the most important things that people should wear? I'm assuming we start with the helmet.
Absolutely. The helmet is by great leaps the most important aspect of protection you can possibly get into. The helmet is protecting your brain. And I was told long ago, if you think you've got a $200 brain, then get a $200 helmet, if you want it, but get all the protection you possibly can afford. I wear a full face helmet, although we have some very sunny and warm days. I think it's still the way to go. A full face helmet with a good visor, and you can change out your visors for sunshine or fog. I used to wear sunglasses underneath the helmet, but I really just use the visor for sun protection now. There's a lot of other aspects that you need to get into. I think protective body gear, you need some padding and some leather or some textile on your upper body. And I believe that you should have something padding your hips and your knees as well. And also, boots are incredibly important. Get some boots with some protective materials inside to protect your feet and lower legs and your ankles. I noticed when I started taking motorcycle cases very early in my career that a lot of the injuries were involving damage and injuries to feet and ankles, and a lot of those injuries could have been prevented or at least reduced by just some good sturdy footwear. There's so much. Also, then I don't want to forget gloves. If for some terrible reason you're knocked off the bike and you end up landing on the pavement, it's just pure reflex that your hands are going to go out first. And if you don't have some good gloves on, you're going to get scraped up at the very least.
You kind of alluded to what I was going to ask you next, Claude, and that is, do you feel like your philosophy about safety has been influenced by the fact your chosen career, and you've seen the worst of what can happen and seen a lot more results of motorcycle accidents than your average rider? Do you think that's had some effect?
My philosophy about what safety gear to wear has definitely been influenced by my career as a motorcycle lawyer, as well as the influence of our senior partner, who was telling us about motorcycle accident cases back when I was just 15 or 16 years old, sitting around the kitchen table. And I'll always remember the story about the motorcycle rider on Highway 1 who was hit by a car on the wrong side of the road, and his leg got taken off. Oh. And because he hit a mile marker. It was a terrible story to me, but this motorcycle rider at the time had felt that it was okay to go out in shorts. And I don't know whether that mile marker still would have caused him great damage, but I know that I don't ride in shorts or topsiders or loafers. I ride in boots. Every once in a while, I might ride in jeans if I think it's a short hop down to a coffee shop. But usually I wear all the gear. And you're right. I wear all the gear because of all the horrible stories I've heard and because of all the people I've represented who've suffered grievous injuries while on a motorcycle. But the helmet is so important.
What about
It's critical.
what about gear on the bike itself? What are
Well,
some?
on the bike itself, there's not necessarily a lot of gear, but the most important things I think that you can do to make sure your motorcycle is increasing your safety as opposed to decreasing your safety is to make you more visible and more perceptible by hearing. There's a dispute as to whether loud pipes do save lives. I think they do. I know that I hear a motorcycle coming sometimes when I don't see them in my mirror. Maybe that bike's in my blind spot. If I'm about to make a lane change and I hear a rumbling of a motorcycle over one of my shoulders, I don't make that lane change, and it's very often because of the sound as opposed to the seeing them. Now, in terms of seeing them, I think you need to wear something on your gear that makes you more visible, maybe a bright helmet, but the headlight is probably the most important aspect of being seen as you approach any kind of motor vehicle. Now, back in the 70s, you didn't have headlights that came on automatically. On most motorcycles today, the headlight comes on automatically as soon as you turn the key. That is very important. I often ride with my high beam on. I find it doesn't really blind anybody in the daytime, but it does assure that I'm going to be seen earlier than if I don't have my headlight on. Some people rig a special switch so you don't have your headlight on all the time. I think that's foolhardy. I understand how people would want to do that just to have more control, but I think a headlight will save your life.
So we've talked about your preferences, Claude. Now tell us, let's talk from the legal side. What are the laws in California as far as safety, and in your opinion, do they go far enough?
I think they go far enough. I think the only law we really have here in terms of what gear a motorcyclist has to wear in California, and it's not this way in every state, but in California, a motorcyclist has to wear a helmet. The helmet has to be DOT approved or have a Snell rating. And when the helmet law was being debated, a lot of motorcyclists really fought it because it fought against that independent spirit that motorcyclists have, and they don't want anybody to tell them what safety gear to wear because, really that should be their choice. And right. While I understand this sentiment, I think it should also be the choice of the state passing the law. Back before we had a helmet law, there were a lot more head injuries become effectively a ward of the state, with the state paying through Medi-Cal or disability, and that the person can't earn a living anymore and the state has to take care of them and nobody's there to pay their medical bills. It is the public's problem. And so I do think the state has a right to regulate it, but also helmets save so many injuries. Not everybody's going to agree with me, but I really feel strongly about it. Get the best helmet you can afford. I only wear a full face helmet. Do not wear the little half helmets that they call a novelty helmet. Those are not legal. Even if you plaster a DOT sticker on it that you can get online, you may be fooling the CHP, but if something happens, you are in a crash, you have no protection. You have less protection than if you're wearing a bicycle helmet. And I've handled these cases. I'm handling them. I'm handling one now. And our firm, we lecture to other lawyers regarding helmet cases, and they're brutal. They're absolutely brutal. Collisions where somebody might not have sustained any injury at all, suddenly their life has been irrevocably altered for the worse.
And probably,
so that helmet law is the only law we have, and it's a good one.
I'm guessing those people who you were just talking about, given the opportunity, might have made a different choice as far as what helmet to wear if they had seen how things are going to work out.
Well, there was a show called Sons of Anarchy, and the stars of that show wore these little tiny helmets that look really cool. And those little tiny helmets got even more popular than they were before. They were called novelty helmets. And the helmet manufacturers would say, oh, we're not selling them for you to use on the road, but they're selling thousands in the United States. And literally, it's an epidemic of brain injuries for motorcyclists who get in what should be relatively minor scrapes, but end up with brain injury. And in California, they've never been legal, but since they're so attractive and so cool, and motorcyclists like to look cool, the show has really made an impact on how many people are wearing these inadequate helmets. And since the show is no longer playing other than reruns, the sales of these helmets have actually gone way down.
The thought just occurred to me, Claude. So let's say I'm a motorcyclist, I'm in an accident, I'm in a crash. Maybe the crash wasn't my fault. Do I bear some responsibility if I'm not wearing the proper safety equipment? Does that affect a case?
Oh, absolutely. It can kill your case. It can kill you if you're not wearing a good helmet, and it can kill your case. Now, if somebody hits you and it's not your fault, and all you have is a head injury, but if you had a legal helmet on and you wouldn't have sustained any head injury, that's a pretty good argument for the insurance company, for the person who hit you. Like, hey, if they'd just been following the law, this biker wouldn't have been hurt. Now, I personally think it's like a seatbelt argument. Some jurors are going to punish you for not wearing a seatbelt, and some jurors are going to say, well, we'll take some away, but still it's the other guy's fault.
Right.
You don't know where it's going to go, but it literally could kill your case.
So speaking of cases, why is it important, Claude, for someone, if a motorcyclist who's in a crash, injured, why is it important they contact someone like yourself?
Well, first of all, it's important to hire as early as possible a lawyer who is well versed in motorcycle crashes. There is such a difference in the dynamics of a motorcycle crash versus a regular four-wheel vehicle that you really need to understand what happens, what the options were, what this motorcyclist did at the time of the collision, whether they were being reasonable or whether there's some comparative negligence. Many a lawyer will turn down a case that our firm will accept because we really understand what options were available to the motorcyclist and how that motorcyclist was really trying to ride as safely as possible. So you need to hire a lawyer as early as possible. Another reason is that usually motorcycle crashes produce more serious injuries. And if you're injured more seriously, you're not as mobile. And you can't just get out to the scene and preserve the evidence. You're going to have to hire a lawyer to determine what kind of evidence needs to be preserved so they can get an investigator out to the scene or go out to the scene themselves. I was hired on a case recently in Sacramento, and I left the client's hospital room and went straight to the scene of the collision and photographed everything to preserve the evidence. There were still tire friction marks on the roadway. There were pieces of his motorcycle strewn about in a certain pattern. These things must be preserved because they'll be gone pretty soon, and they are important for accident reconstruction. And a lot of times, if your motorcyclist has been seriously injured, he or she will not even remember the facts of the collision. And guess what? The person who hurt them may not remember them very accurately. So preserving evidence is extremely important, but also you're going to want advice. Later down the road, you're not going to want to try and settle your case for your motorcycle collision by yourself.
Right.
So why hire a lawyer later when they're on a contingency fee and they're going to get the same percentage anyway, but they could have been advising you from the first day? Well, probably not the first day, but from very early on. You're never going to want to settle a real serious injury motorcycle collision without a lawyer. So hire them early. Whether you hire our firm or hire another firm that is really well versed in motorcycle collisions, do it early. Get the advice you need. Make sure the evidence is preserved. It makes all the difference in the world. I have so many calls literally every day where people call up and they tell me, well, this hasn't been done and that hasn't been done. And well, what do I do? Can you help me? And I'm at some point, there's nothing I can do if I can't prove the case that the client is telling me they have, right? They tell me I've got these facts, but I need to prove it. I need evidence. And it's much better if I get involved in a case far earlier. And guess what? My percentage doesn't go up if I get involved earlier. It stays the same.
Right. Claude, great advice, helpful information as usual. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
Well, I wish I could go on and talk more about motorcycles, sadly about motorcycle collisions, but we're here to help. Anytime anybody wants any advice, we spend a lot of time giving free advice on the phone. And Rob, I always appreciate you and your astute questions. Wish you a very good weekend.
Thank you, buddy. That's going to do it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been attorney Claude Wyle of San Francisco. If you want the best information about motorcycle accidents, or you're ready to choose a lawyer that lawyers choose, make sure to visit askthelawyer.com. Also, please take a second to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the button at the bottom of the screen. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal with AskTheLawyers.com.